I usually call it the can.
I call it the loo. I think we both do. And I don't mind calling it the loo in front of anybody, even if the person I'm talking to calls it the toilet.
Well, the smallest room in the house is the toilet.
The smallest room in the house? I should say the official study of the vicarage.
Well, what do you mean, the toilet?
Words used to be the hallmarks of our class system. Hear a man speak, and you had him precisely placed on his rung of the British social ladder.
I think so, yes. Yes. He has a check tie.
Yes.
But he still has uniform trousers
Yes,
on.
definitely, I should imagine, unskilled worker. Oh, he could,
Yes.
of course, be a skilled worker, you know.
Yes.
It's rather difficult. Uniforms are rather difficult.
I think possibly a worker who hasn't had to serve an apprenticeship for his particular job. A DE, do you agree?
DE, yes.
But today, class matters in a different way to different people. People who need exact knowledge of who buys what and who goes where and why. Day after day, the researchers are in the field, pens in one hand, question sheets in the other. And in 90% of all their surveys, the social class of the person interviewed must be unerringly set down.
They might be C2s.
Yes, I think by the sort of way they're carrying their luggage. All
yes, no taxi.
No taxi, and all stuffed in the bags like that.
Definitely
Clothing,
reasonable, but not
cheap,
terribly expensive.
Not expensive. Definitely C2 family.
Yes, I think
we
so.
Think this. We think.
I think the lady possibly sets her own hair, which is always an indication.
Yes. The children are nicely dressed.
Yes, they are.
Yes. Probably a skilled worker.
A skilled, yes,
description.
a skilled worker.
I would
think
say so. Yes, I would say so.
Certain apprenticeship or done some qualifying time.
We agree then.
Yes, we
C2?
think C2.
We think so. Yes.
Yes.
Now we've got some ladies to classify. I should say, I don't know about you, Pam, but I would classify this as C2. What do you think?
Yes. They're quite nicely, quite neatly dressed.
Yes.
Not terribly expensive.
No.
In the word of the hard sell, nobody talks about the upper and the lower classes. Now we are A's or B's, C1s, C2s, D's or E's. You and I and everyone has his proper place and a letter beside his name. How much do these letters mean? Are the old snobberies really dead or dying? Or do they live on in the new compartments of class, mocking the barriers between one letter and the next? Now, on this quota type of sample that you have to take, you have to find a certain number of people in each of the A, B, C, D, E classes, don't you? How do you go about that job?
Well, if we are interviewing out of doors, you can assess people by their front doors, by their houses, by the furnishings, curtains, things like that. You can class them, you can say, well, these look like professional people. On the other hand, you can go down to the other end of the scale and have lace curtains at a window, or perhaps a rather not quite so well painted house. And
what signs do you go for? Are these curtains and things the things that you go for too?
Yes, I think so. The outside appearance of the house, certainly. The state of the garden, perhaps the state of the fence outside. Chain link fencing as opposed to a rickety wooden fence, for instance.
Can you often guess what kind of things they will have inside the house from the outside? Do the C2s and the C1s, for instance, have different kinds of furnishing?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. I think possibly the C1 furnishing is more akin to AB. The C2 perhaps tend to go in for
shiny kind of furniture,
yes.
Veneered furniture,
modern.
And china dogs on the mantelpiece, this kind of
ducks
thing.
in flight on the wall,
artificial flowers, ghastly plastic flowers,
yes,
this kind of thing.
Do you tell them ever what class you've put them into?
No, they never ask.
They don't ask.
We don't mention the word class. We merely ask the occupation of the head of the household.
Yes.
And if they ask why we wish to know that, we just say that we have to have a cross-section of people in different jobs, and it would never do if we interviewed 59 bus conductors' wives.
No, they all have
and this
the same
passes off
opinion,
quite
they?
happily.
Yes. No, they
class
don't
is never mentioned at all. Never.
The word class is never mentioned, but an E is an E all the same. The lady who lives in 2 upstairs rooms of this house in Quick Street, Islington, is an E. The manual says that E's are those at the lowest level of subsistence, state pensioners, widows, people who through unemployment or sickness are unable to take a place in higher grades. Mrs. Herbert lost her husband last May. has an income of £4 and sixpence a week. She lives in a combined kitchen, bathroom and living room. The bathroom, all 18 inches of it, is a little cramped. But with the Daily Mirror, Rivali and the odd bus tour, she lives content. In this modest life, what does she treasure most?
It's my cat. Oh, he's lovely. I'm very fond of him. And he's really my mate, you know. He's in one chair, I'm in the other.
If you said you had a luxury still, something you know you buy but you could do without, what would that be?
A Guinness?
Do you have Guinness?
I have a Guinness, yeah.
How often?
On a Friday, Saturday and Sunday.
How much do you have?
A pint.
An E is an E, but perhaps some E's would never admit it, even if they knew. This is the home of Miss Gordon. She also lives in upstairs rooms alone. For 30 years, she's been a nanny, loving other people's children and saying goodbye. She clings to her fading treasures and she keeps up brave appearances. But now she has trouble with her legs and is retired, doing part-time babysitting to add to her small income. No TV set, no weekend Guinness. Instead, she scrapes enough together each year to take a fortnight's cruise. In her time, she has nannied all manner of people. What does she consider were the top and the bottom ends of her career?
Well, I suppose the top, as you call it, would be a short time. I was working for a royal family, continental, of course, not our own. And I would say the bottom was a corresponding short time when I was working for some business people who were of a typical East End extraction, completely uneducated, and who didn't in any way ever try to change themselves, but just, you know, lived the way they had been brought up, apart from the fact, of course, that they were far better off than their parents had been.
If you had to choose, would you rather be a nanny to someone of what you might call high social background, or would you prefer to be amongst the people like the East Enders for whom you worked?
Like which?
The East Enders.
Oh, well, definitely. People have a certain education, because after all, when you've got to be with people, you want to have some ideas in common if you're going to spend a certain amount of time with them, you know. And there's very little communication with people who don't read or take any interest in anything that you're interested in yourself, you know. There's nothing you can discuss with them once you get outside the work itself, you know.
Now, I know you've no children of your own, but if you had, how would you like to see them educated?
Well, I think on very conventional lines, local private school when they're very small, followed by prep school and public school, if I were able to afford it.
Why do you stipulate that? What do you think the prep and public school give them that they wouldn't get elsewhere?
Well, I think if you're lucky and choose a good school, of course, a very good education, and I think it's good for a child's character not always to be at home in its own family. And also I think that children away at school tend to make much deeper and more lasting friendships, which seem to stay with them rather than children who go to school locally. I suppose it's rather on the principle of castaways on a desert island. When they're away from their own homes, you know, they tend to show more affection for other people, and I think that...
Do you feel that young people brought up in this way have a stamp on them that the others haven't got?
Generally speaking, I would say so. Of course, not necessarily. I mean, there are some very good day schools, I mean, like St. Paul's and so forth, you know, which obviously turn out a very good product. But in general, I would say there's a difference.
What was your own background?
Well, very, there again, very simple and ordinary. My father was in business. I was brought up in Cornwall. We had a rather lovely large house which was within reach of the sea, though not actually, at the seaside. Had a large garden, including tennis court and croquet lawn, which, of course, croquet was popular in those days, is now coming again after a lapse of many years.
This is the workplace of a C2. C2 because the C class is divided into two. The gulf between C2 and C1 is a gulf that can only rarely be bridged in less than a generation. It's the gulf between the shop floor and the office, between secondary modern and grammar school. The C2s are the foremen, the charge hands, the skilled craftsmen. Reg Hadley is a machinist, income around £25 a week. He says these days the unskilled man, the man with the D label, is better off than he is. He would like his sons to become executives. He once tried to make the C1 grade himself, but couldn't stand the worry. Mr. Grant is also a C2. He's manager of a butcher's shop and wouldn't want further promotion or a shop of his own. There's too much responsibility. He's a moderate man, moderate drinker, moderate smoker, moderate flutterer on the pools. Mrs. Grant works too. She's a tea lady who loves her bingo. They wouldn't send their son to a public school. It wouldn't become them. When she won £200 at bingo, she sent their only daughter on a package holiday to Los Angeles. The Grants live in a Fulham flat with magic-hole fire and wood-grained wallpaper. It's furnished to the last cubic inch. Souvenirs from holidays in Austria and a cocktail cabinet with interior light. With their one daughter and their budgie, both are completely content. John Ryan is a tunneler on the Victoria Line. He also is a C2, like all underground workers. He comes from Tipperary, has a wife and one child with one on the way. He lives in 3 rooms in West Ealing and is paid like a Times top person.
Well, it averages every week, some weeks 70, 50, maybe back to 80 again. But by the time the taxman is finished with it, well, I don't have much. You could say in the last 2 weeks, I've paid £32 in tax.
And what class would you say you were in? Working, middle, upper, lower?
Well, I worked like a horse, and I suppose I'd class myself as that. But I wouldn't go to say I'm the lower class. I mean, I think I'm as good as the next man. I made a living the same as everybody else. And I wouldn't put myself to say I'm the lower class, or the top class, probably. But I don't go to work with a collar and tie.
Do you feel at any time that people are looking down on you as a navvy?
Well, they try to keep clear of you, and because you got a bit of muck on your shoes, your clothes are a bit dirty, and they're afraid to touch you. And they keep on staring at you. Well, I mean, it doesn't make any difference to me if they stare or not, because I'm just earning a living the same as everybody else.
Do you think that people still think that a navvy is of a certain type?
Well, yeah, the scrum of the earth, I suppose. That's the way I look at it.
What would you like your son to become?
I'd like my son to become an engineer on motorways or something like that. Somewhere with a better future than I have anyhow.
Would you be prepared to pay for an education? Would you like him to go to a public school and become a gentleman?
Yes, I would and I will if I can.
Nick, Dobby.
A prep school in Hertfordshire, a long way from the navvy's world, but the working ground of Mr. Langrishe, a preparatory schoolmaster. He is a C1, and the C1s are undeniably middle class, like the A's and the B's above them. Usually, the market researchers bracket the A's and B's together in one class. The C1s are the ABs on the way up, or the ABs which might have been. How well might the navvy's son fit in amongst Mr. Langrishe's boys?
At first, he would probably find it very difficult. because it is inevitably a matter of background.
Would the rest of the boys look down on him, do you think?
I doubt it. Only if his code of conduct was significantly worse in this kind of sense. Does he shovel his food in with his hand when he's having a meal, or does he eat reasonably decently with a knife and fork? Probably does eat very well with a knife and fork, for all one knows.
What other things might form a barrier of this kind?
Now, where I've seen, I have occasionally, just asked these children that I teach almost the point-blank question, are they class conscious? Are you conscious that, say, children of a postman or a bus driver are in any way different to you? Oh, yes, they said. We don't like being attacked in the street and called snobs. I said, well, that's probably because you are snobs. Well, if we are snobs, they are yobs. And so we get this yobs-snobs complex.
It does seem, then, that there is something of a class consciousness both ways here.
I'm afraid there is class consciousness both ways. I wish there weren't, and it is wrong. But it's a very difficult thing to, what's the word, disestablish.
Bearing this in mind, would you send your own son, if you had one, to a public school?
I most definitely would, means provided. I went to a public school myself, and the devil who knows better than the one who don't, and the public schools seem to me to, by being boarding schools, do offer an existence which is perhaps monastic to a certain degree, but has many opportunities which, because they're boarding schools, a day school doesn't have.
What are your ambitions for your children?
Do you mean by that when they grow up?
Mm-hmm. What would you like them to be able to do?
What they want, within sensible reason. If my child or children grew up and said at the end of an expensive education that they just wanted to go down a mine or to drive a bus, I'd say, well, that is ridiculous. I have spent a great deal of money on your education. Surely you can think of something which is making use of your intellect a little more. I'm fortunate in that my daughter is by no means a fool, and I think will be able to take advantage of the education that I'm giving her. She hasn't made up her mind what she wants to be. It varies between a vet, a nurse, a ballet dancer, all of which...
but never a waitress.
I haven't asked her if she wants to be a waitress, but I will, and I can let you know.
She said she wanted to be a waitress. How would you feel?
I'd say to her, go ahead and be a waitress. You'll get bored with it after a few months, and then you'll be what you really wanted to be, which is something quite different, probably using your intellect.
How about your own ambitions? Are you at all disappointed that you are a prep schoolmaster at this time of life?
Sometimes I feel disappointed that I am a preparatory schoolmaster and not perhaps something which could be rated a little higher in some mythical classification list. I am abundantly happy, which to me is the most important point.
The home of Mr. Tenant, a lieutenant in the Royal Horse Artillery, Wellington School and Sandhurst. The son of an army officer, he's married to a girl whose father was an army officer too. A C1 as a lieutenant, Mr. Tenant will be a B as a captain and an A as lieutenant colonel. But whatever his letter, he feels that the public school forms a club for life.
Eton particularly, I think, is a most excellent club, a very valuable club, I mean, really. And Etonians will go out of their way to, having seen the pale blue stripe on the tie, to help another Etonian. I think this is extremely valuable, and although it may not be essential, it's a help.
So do you feel the army life is easier for an ex-public school boy than it would be for a, say, a grammar school boy?
I think it is. I think in its early stages, army life is very much easier. It's a natural flow on for an ex-public school boy, whereas for somebody who hasn't been to a public school, goes to Sandhurst, and he suddenly comes up with a bit of a jolt against some of the things that he hadn't been perhaps used to.
Could you give me any particular examples of the kind of thing where you think it helped?
Oh dear, I've got to think back to Sandhurst and try and think of the sort of training there, really. But I think in the sort of the code, it's an awful word, but the code that one is expected to know perhaps at Sandhurst, on the games field, that sort of thing, being a good loser and so on. I think that is perhaps an instance.
Can I come now on to tastes? Can you give me an idea of what you like to eat? What is your idea of a favourite meal?
If no expense is spared, my tastes are fairly conservative. My wife's are much more enterprising, really. Fondue bourguignon is a thing I've always had a bit of a passion for. I enjoy cooking something myself, even if it's only in a simple way like that.
Is it easy to manage living the way you'd like to on a lieutenant's pay?
It's basically, it's difficult. One manages. I'm particularly lucky in that I have got a private income to a certain extent, and this just about clears the deficit.
In slightly older days, the army and the church were always fit professions for the younger sons of the upper class, and vicars are ABs, however hard up. The stipend of the Reverend C.W. Gibbons is £20 a week. He lives in this vicarage in a small Cambridgeshire parish. His pictures, his Chelsea figurines, his library of philosophy and religion are his most prized possessions, more so than his Cortina super. His greatest extravagance is making one 8mm cine film a year when he takes his holiday. The bishops may not have heard of the new Class ABC. Could it be the old class system still rules the church?
I'm afraid that it does, yes. Yes.
In what way?
If you look at the higher ranks of the clergy, I think you'll find a very large proportion come from the bigger public schools, and certainly the universities of Oxford and Cambridge.
Vicars do certainly still tend to be of a rather different class from their parishioners. How do you try to break down the barriers?
If only one could get people to talk about these things frankly and man to man, then I think one would overcome them more. In fact, I blame myself for not, so to speak, lounging over the bar of the Oak more often. I'm afraid I very rarely go down.
Now, probably many of the villagers working in industry these days are very much better off than you are. How do their earnings compare with your stipend?
Well, I'm pretty sure that the majority of them would top mine. You see, they can work as much overtime as they like.
People are very money conscious these days. Does the fact that the villagers are often earning more than you are, does this mean that they despise you? Or tend to have some kind of contempt?
They may try and persuade themselves that they can despise me. But deep in their hearts, they know that they've got money. But they haven't got some of the other things which I've got, which they would desperately like.
The most with-it house in the most with-it road in London's most with-it borough. The Islington home of the Duffells, A's beyond all question. Mr. Duffell is a film director with an income of over £4,000 a year. The Duffells, their 40-month-old son, their resident nanny and their shaggy dog are great consumers. They fill the fruit bowls several times a week. And although Mr. Duffell says he's not above fish and chips in newspaper, their kitchen is equipped to provide rich eating and drinking. They take the Guardian, the Mail, the Spectator, the New Statesman, Vogue and Harper's. The Hi-Fi is equipped with earphones for when baby is asleep. And the travel agents love them, for they holiday twice over. For Mr. Duffell likes to holiday in remoter Spain.
No, I don't think the Costa Brava would suit me at all, no.
Why not?
Well, because I'm interested in the country. I'm not really interested in simply in going somewhere to soak up sun and fish and chips or what have you,
And Mrs. Duffell loves the winter snow.
Well, I love skiing. And my favourite holidays are somewhere in the snow. Preferably France, because I speak French. And because I like French food. And because I like the French people. This year we're not actually going to France. We're going to Switzerland because we spent such a long time there last year and we'd like to go somewhere different. But I've no doubt we shall go back again next year.
Do you consider yourself an upper-class person?
No, I don't consider myself an upper-class person in social terms. I know I come into that category, of course, from a purely financial economic way.
I don't really classify myself as anything. I suppose financially, I suppose we come into the sort of one of the higher brackets, but I don't really think about class in this way. If you mean upper class, middle class, lower class, I really don't know.
And like many other of the new ABs, they profess no love for the public school system.
I have no desire to send him to a public school because I don't feel that the public school will offer him anything other than a set of values which don't belong to this time and this generation.
I think it's terrible to stick girls away behind walls until they are 16 or 17 years of age, except for about 3 months of the year. They then come out when they're 17, unable to speak to anybody and just stare at their toes. And I think the same thing applies to boys. I think that's just as bad.
Are the Duffells giving birth to the classless society where every child starts equal, where no privileges are sought or bought? Well, not quite. Mr. Duffell started at the council school. Will his son?
No, if it has to be, yes, but I don't particularly want him to do so. I want to pay for his education if needs be. I have a feeling that possibly by the time he's old enough to go to school, he's only 14 months old at the moment, that the comprehensive school system may give what I think he needs at this time. At the moment, my plan is to send him to either one of two places. Either to the lycée, because I believe that having another language is a very good thing, and to learn another language at a very early age is a tremendous value. Or perhaps to a progressive school I know, which seems to me, from what I know of its pupils, to turn out fairly rounded citizens.
So Eton is out and the lycée is in, at near enough the same price. Inside the little lettered boxes of the new class system, everything changes, everything is the same.
He has a grip, a heavy grip, looks like he's going somewhere, white collar. What do you think, Pam?
Well, he's not carrying any sort of newspaper, which is always an extremely good indication.
And his clothes are difficult to tell from his type of clothes.
I should imagine C1 again, a white collar worker, a clerical worker.
Yes.